So we all talk about AI all the time, and to borrow from Donald Rumsfeld, it's the great known unknown. We all know it's going to have a massive impact. We have no idea how or why, and it's big. It just feels really big, and we really struggle to find a bite-sized piece of AI that we can bring into our business that we can use to make a difference. Fortunately, we have an expert in bite-sized AI in John. And John, how did you come to this expertise at Datasparq?
Thanks. I've always been a tinkerer. I like getting my hands dirty, and after 15 years in consulting, just got tired of the PowerPoint punditry and the pontificating. So founded Datasparq on the premise of having practitioners, people who enjoy building stuff, tinkerers like me, making things work in the real world. I took the best bits of my professional services career. So I had started off 5 years in a creative agency, a very design-led thinking approach, still a lot of PowerPoint and a lot of creative applications that probably weren't quite necessary, but fun. 5 years at Accenture, where it's seeing problems done by brute force, but again, lots and lots of people getting their hands dirty, building things that often are over budget and take too long. And then 5 years at McKinsey Quantum Black, seeing what smaller teams forensically solving high-value problems, but again, just doing PowerPoint and not actually delivering anything. And I wanted to pick those key food groups and thought, to make AI real in the real world, to give tooling to people in the business to make a difference, you need the data science thinking, the clever minds, but you need robust engineering, but you also need design thinking. You need designers, creative thinkers who can think, how do I get Susan and Jeff in a commercial team to make better decisions on pricing? How do I get Susan and Jeff in the yard of a depot to put trucks on better routes? Because these people can't code on the command line. They're probably not going to use ChatGPT for some of these problems. So how do you insert AI at the right part of the process? And that requires that combination of design thinking, data science, and engineering. And it was bringing all those practitioners together to do that and figure out what's important and where not to do it.
So when was that? When did you found Datasparq?
We founded 5 or 6 years ago. I think we got sort of solo a week before lockdown. So it's been a bumpy roller coaster for 5 or 6 years, but we've grown from 5 people to over 50 people. And work across enterprise and PE-backed businesses.
And what's been the biggest change in the kind of perception of AI over that period?
There's no doubt that the last 2 or 3 years, the explosion of AI and everyone's agenda that's been created by ChatGPT, it's helped and it's not been helpful. It's certainly put AI on everyone's radar, but it's put a really distorted view on what AI is. You talked about Donald Rumsfeld and the unknown unknowns. I almost feel the known unknowns are also a bit incorrect. People think, I don't know where to use AI, but their view of AI is it's Gen AI and it's chatbots.
Yeah.
Chatbots can be helpful, don't get me wrong. The technology behind it is incredible and there's lots of great things that can be done with that. But as everyone is over here thinking around how to deploy chatbots and agents in their business to do things 5 minutes faster or summarize emails, it's not always going to be transformational, although it can be helpful. There's a huge forgotten space. And we talked about, talking about infrastructure earlier. I actually think there's a whole forgotten sector, businesses, the complex operations, people who move things, make things, serve customers, where chatbots aren't necessarily going to be helpful, but the old tools, techniques from the 50s, like operations research, could really be impactful. And applying some of those techniques to those sorts of businesses, and again, finding the Susans and Jeffs where things can be done faster is often overlooked.
And how do you engage with a client? Where does the first spark of what they want to do and what you can provide, how does that come together to give a solution?
It's hard. I think the AI can do so many, it can almost do anything. It can do everything, but just because it can doesn't mean it should. And it's making sure you direct the focus on the biggest problems. And one of the biggest disconnects that we see is all the enthusiasm for AI in the business is often in someone in the organization who's tech first, already trying ChatGPT and things on their own, and so they're going to apply these latest technologies to their small problem. And then you'll have the board who've got much bigger problems to worry about, and they don't really know how to connect these two things, and so they just let all that energy and enthusiasm get applied to people turning on the AI co-pilot feature of HubSpot and trying things, and it's like, well, you're saving 5 minutes here, but you're not solving the big enterprise problem. And so part of the challenge is joining those dots. And I often just tell leadership teams, broadly, there are three things where AI is often additive and incremental, and these are sorts of problems you should look for that are board problems, and direct your AI energy enthusiasm to those things. And the three areas are, yes, one, automation, of which Gen AI is a part. And the question I ask the board there is, look, if you had, this is copying a Ben Evans anecdote, if you had 1,000 interns, what would you have them do? Because where you could deploy 1,000 interns is probably a good candidate for one class of AI that's around automation. There's then another class of AI, which is one of anticipation. And so I asked the board, if you had a crystal ball, what would you ask it? Because by anticipating the future, how can you intervene earlier now and get advantage of it? If you're a manufacturer of long lead supply items, you can really optimize your inventory if you had a crystal ball, knowing what sizes of what items of the latest fashion people are going to buy. We've just done a huge piece of work small piece of work for a huge retailer who are buying fashion. Long lead time, you've got to order almost a year in advance. Every year they're left with the wrong colored t-shirt and the wrong size. Over 8 weeks, basically saved them 4 million by helping them understand the right things to order at the right time. That crystal ball. And then the third bucket is one of optimization. How do you make the best of what you've got? Again, we talked about a lot of the infrastructure businesses. If you move things or make things, you've got a limited capacity of people, of fleets, of warehouse space. How do you squeeze more out of that? That's where AI is really good at going above and beyond the 20, 50 years of human ingenuity that those businesses have been run on, and a whole list of if-then-else rules to squeeze efficiency out of the system. AI can really come up, and optimization techniques can explore more options, come up with better rules to put your trucks on better routes, to reduce mileage, to use that warehouse.
Can you walk us through a specific project from the last one, actually, that showed how that impacted the business?
There's a journey. So let me take you through kind of the end state. One we just finished, and then almost another one which is the beginning of someone on a similar journey. So this is public, so I can talk about it. So GXO, one of the world's biggest third-party logistics companies, they run the delivery backbone for most UK supermarkets and other retailers. So Iceland is one of their customers. Iceland have a fleet of over 600 vehicles operating out of 6 depots across the country, replenishing stores. So if anyone shops in Iceland, the stores only have items in them because these 600 trucks are traveling across 6 depots to over 1,000 stores. That costs Iceland over 100 million a year in transport costs, largely fuel and HGV drivers, and those costs are only going up. Some of you might have heard about the traveling salesperson problem. Turns out if you have one van and only 56 locations, there are more permutations in visiting those locations than there are atoms in the observable universe. So if you are Iceland and you have 600 vans and over 1,000 locations, there's no way in the world you can find the best solution. Even all of the cloud compute power, maybe with quantum you can do it, but that doesn't exist yet, but you're never going to find the optimal route. So you're already spending 100 million. How do you find quicker, faster routes? There are very complex methods out to do that. Combining those methods with the power of cloud compute, we're able to find schedules that were shorter. So that started speaking to GXO and them saying, this is one of our biggest cost items. As a business, 1/3 of our cost is on the roads. Sorry, 2/3 of our cost is on the roads. 1/3 of our cost is in the 4 walls of the warehouse. Most of our road cost is transport. If you can help us cut that, so that's where then you say, right, well, let's start with the big high-value problem. Let's look at what data you have and how can do it. Now, what's the thing we actually give you? Because the best algorithm in the world isn't going to work unless Susan and Jeff in the depot can actually put trucks on those routes. You've got to get unions involved. You have to speak to the stores, because one of the ways you can optimize those routes is by understanding what flexes and what you can change. Turns out one of the biggest restricted things in that problem was that Iceland say, well, you can't come to this store before 7 o'clock in the morning. But it turns out if you went to some stores at 7:30, it unlocks a whole bunch more routes that save a lot of miles. So that then allows, by giving those tools to the Susan and Jeff, they can go to those store managers and say, look, if we just open the doors half an hour early, we'll share some of these savings with you. So that's where that design thinking is really important, because you've got to think around how these things are going to be deployed on the floor. And so that's one example of GXO.
And are you essentially setting up programming that interrogates their systems to discover that? How does that work?
No. So AI ultimately is software.
Yep.
The thing that GXO now have is a piece of software that they can run every day, and it's an operational, enduring tool that sits alongside the other transport management systems they have. So AI often manifests itself at the end as a piece of software. It's something that Susan and Jeff can use. For EasyJet, and I'm sorry if any of you fly EasyJet and you're paying over the odds for cabin bags and paninis, sorry, we do a pricing algorithm for their commercial team. But again, it's an enduring tool. It's often these operational decisions are decisions you make frequently. It's not a one-off piece of analysis. But it can also start off with a one-off piece of analysis. So if I give you another example, another piece we just finished, one of the UK's largest vehicle breakdown recovery businesses. Again, similar problem, lots of costly patrols that they need to make run more efficiently. The end goal for them is a fancy optimization tool that understands which patrol to go where, how you're balancing recovering people on time, not paying over the price for contractors, being able to fix on the side of the road and not tow it away. So lots of complex moving parts of the business. You're not going to get there overnight. That could take 2 years to build something that solves that level of complexity. But in the first few weeks, what we've done is understand some of the macro drivers for that inefficiency, identified particular behavioral challenges across patrols. The business, for good reason, wanted to incentivize more jobs getting done in the day, so would offer bonuses to patrols that stayed late, worked overtime to finish that last job of the day. Turns out some patrols are gaming that system and showing bad behavior and taking purposely longer on the penultimate job of the day, just so that when they have to fix that battery at the end of the day, it takes them over that threshold. So that's causing a whole bunch of inefficient utilization problems. But that first step, getting the data together for the first time, pulling GPS data from the patrols, understanding previous schedules, what it costs to serve some of these things, to some extent some basic unit economics, even in the space of these first 2 months, have given them some tangible things, some tools that their operations team can now allocate and have meaningful conversations with the resource patrols. And that's the next step to, right, well, now we can simulate a better allocation of resources. There's another step to the bigger end goal of an ultimate optimization tool.
So those are very operational. Are there some that are more in the kind of knowledge-based economy that you've worked on?
Yeah, I think that automation bucket largely applies to professional services.
Yeah.
And that's where almost it's less fancy AI and just as much good data and instrumentation. So one example is property leasing. So CPP's ownership of the Trafford Centre. If any of you are from that neck of the woods and shop in the Trafford Centre, when we first started working with them, they still had a big empty Debenhams at one end, and it was understanding, how do we fill these units, empty units, with retailers and food and beverage. And there, the leasing team, estate agents filling these units, was a very manual process. It was all paper-based. They would turn up to a retailer like a Uniqlo with a big paper map of the Trafford Centre that was probably out of date and had the wrong shops on it, and they would say, look, you should have this unit here, it's great. And that was their pitch. But we discovered actually how do you automate and improve that professional services model, that leasing process, where ultimately their job is to convince retailers you want to be in the north, not in the West End, not just the West End. Once you're in the north, you want to be in the Trafford Centre, not downtown Manchester. And once we've convinced you want to be in the Trafford Centre, we want to convince you don't have to be in that valuable strip between Selfridges and the Apple Store. That's where everyone wants to be, but there's plenty of empty units elsewhere. But that involved pulling data from all the existing retailers, pulling data from third-party systems like Barclaycard and O2 to understand what type of people were traveling what distance to look at things and to buy things of different categories. How many people were coming through the doors to then look and buy at what categories. But before, when they were asked how many people shop in the Trafford Centre, they just counted the number of cars in the car park and multiplied it by 2. But now we're able to, just by putting all this data together, give them a digital map of the Trafford Centre that showed, look, here's footfall, here's the average money through the tills, for this category, here's how you compare. That tooling now, the leasing team, again, the Susan and Jeff and that team can go and walk with the head of retail at Uniqlo down the Trafford Centre and say, look, last week, this retailer's done X% more than its competitors. You could, if we put you in this store tomorrow, look what you could be doing. So in that sense, very little AI, a little bit of maybe predicting football and things, but that's where, again, the creative design thinking is just as important. It's understanding what's going to help Susan and Jeff, in this case, in a property leasing scenario, do their job better, make more compelling pitches, fill units faster. And in that case, it was bringing data together in a usable, compelling way.
John, that's an incredibly helpful exposition, because I think as we look at that great unknown, you can suddenly see how you parcel it down into problems, and then what's the problem that we can solve. And I'm sure that the field here have lots of problems, so I'm going to throw it to questions early, because I'm sure you have a lot that you'd like to learn from John.
Hi, Joanna from Little Moons, so part of the management team there. We're a small business. We're making stuff, some delicious ice cream, and we're selling it to customers in the UK, countries all over the world. So we definitely fall into that, making things, shipping them around. But we're a small business. Like, these all sound like grand things, but I've no sense of whether I can afford them or not.
It's a good question. I think with all of these problems, there's always a bronze, silver and gold solution. And there's no doubt that as you go from a bronze, silver, gold, you're increasing complexity and cost to get that done. So that's where there's a bit of an art, I think, to what we do. Sometimes it's not going to be worth investing $250,000 in a fancy inventory optimization tool. You could probably get 80% of the value with a couple of Tableau dashboards and data from 2 systems giving your trading team what they need. So there is a bit of a judgment call. Not everyone needs the fancy gold-plated version, and that's not part of what we do. Often people want the big fancy version because it sounds fancy and it is fancy, but they don't understand what it's going to take to build and also maintain. For some of the more complex tools, then you, like a puppy for Christmas, complex models need fed and watered. So there is a balance. It doesn't mean you can't play at all in that space. Say the Trafford Centre example, they didn't need a fancy gold-plated tool. For them, they got a lot of value just through simple putting things together. So that's where I think it's important for you to be like, well, this is my biggest problem. This is my biggest cost of the business I want to try and cut back. This is my biggest opportunity for growth. I really want to accelerate. Now, based on that, what's worth investing? If I was to take 1/10 of that, what can I do? What's the best I can get? And does that buy me a bronze, silver, gold?
At what point would you recommend a company hire an AI responsible? Given the fact that it's so broad, there's so many different applications, is it worthwhile having someone in the company would you recommend a company having somebody internal thinking about this? Or is it always, it's too generalistic, better to know which more of a freelancer or bring in somebody to solve specific problems depending on what it is?
I think it's related to the question before. What we find in enterprise, when you're EasyJet, you're big enough and there's enough big problems to have a whole team of people doing this. When you're, one of our first clients in the early days was another sister company in our portfolio that was a car park management business based in Chorley. I'm giving away who it is, but I haven't said that. But they weren't big enough, and then, or even they're going to be able to attract and retain that sort of talent. So there's a combination of things, but they were big enough and they had problems valuable enough that they could have hired people like us to do that for them, but just they were in the wrong part of the country, and it also doesn't really make sense in the long run. So there's not a simple answer. I think there's probably a minimum investment you need to make. Don't believe you're going to get one generalist data science who's a unicorn that can do everything. That's what we often see. Everyone's said, oh, I've hired a data scientist, we can do this. This is a team sport. You need 5 or 6 very different, distinct skills, and you need the depth across those. You need, as I say, that design thinking skill. What do you give the Susans and Jeff? You need the data science skills. Sometimes you might need 2 or 3 different flavors of data science, because even not one smart data scientist knows traditional machine learning, optimization, reinforcement learning, and all the techniques might be required. You then need software engineering, not just data engineering, but software engineering, because if I'm giving a tool to Susan and Jeff, if it's probably going to be mission critical, it can't fall over on a Wednesday lunchtime. So the lines of Python that a data scientist might do aren't going to then be robust and stand up to the security and the scalability that's going to be required. So you probably need 2 or 3 software devs. Then you've got to worry about who's going to maintain it. Then you need to worry about the change and deployment. So you're talking about 7 or 8 people with distinct skills to identify, design, build and deploy and run these things. So you've got to be at quite a size where you can justify 7 or 8 people doing that. I think the hiring one data scientist to try and do everything almost gets you nowhere. You know, they might help you add some rigor around when we turn on the Copilot feature of this SaaS tool, are we doing it right? Are we integrating these things? But you're not going to get very far. And that's why I think there's a bit of a minimum floor. But if the size of the prize is worth it, but if not, there's people like Datasparq to try and help.
Thank you. John, I've got a couple of questions, if I may. You worked at Accenture, and then, was it Quantum Black? You said the McKinsey group. Okay, all right. I'll talk in bullet points then. 3. I'm from an old style industry, which is care homes. We always thought we were a little bit defensive, because the 3 changes that we thought we were protected against would be, you can't particularly productize it, because you have to, someone has to do it as a service, so the Chinese couldn't make it cheaper. Secondly, you couldn't really deal with it through an internet line. Some intelligent person abroad couldn't do it, because it had to be delivered on site. And then thirdly, we thought that there'd be no real technological shift that would take the market away. Okay, so we thought it was relatively defensive, and it has been up to now. So we're just going through a thinking where AI can play a role in an old-style, largely paper-based industry. So the question I have is, for these, we just started putting some technology in now, but we're conflicted. Should we wait? And will AI develop to a point where it'll interrogate what we've got, rather than put in bespoke systems around, and or will it just overlap around that? And you know, should we just wait a little while to do it? And then we're just not clear, because we're a bit worried that if we put in systems now, they may not be AI-able in the same way, or do you think that's overblown?
I mean, there's always going to be new technology and easier ways of doing things. There's some things you can do to defend yourselves. I mean, I think when we build solutions, rather than, there's always a sort of buy or build decision. There's always a startup that's been going 3 weeks that claims to do this one niche thing very well. Who's to know if that startup will exist in the next 3 weeks? What is a trend is that the hyperscalers are just mopping up and really adding the feature set to their tools. So the hyperscalers, I mean Google, Amazon, Azure, Microsoft, and to some extent of Databricks and Snowflake in that space too. So you'll always likely need to have your data foundations in one of these things. If your data, primary data, is sort of being consolidated in one of those hyperscalers, it may not be as easy just to pluck a little SaaS tool that does this niche one-off thing, but it will be very close to as easy almost to figure out, look at what tooling those hyperscalers, who are very fast followers in that space, are adding to their suite of things to say, look, just configure the things that we're giving you to do it yourself. And that's probably going to be a safer option, because those hyperscalers are highly unlikely to go anywhere anytime soon. So configuring the tools that they are giving you at your disposal is probably a safer option than taking it back elsewhere.
But most of the specialist providers in healthcare and or social care tend to be small organisations who are not hyperscalers. They're very much niche providers. And the question is, do we lock ourselves out of future developments by investing too much in them too early?
Well, but what I'm saying, they're probably, I don't know that industry in depth, but I can't imagine they're doing anything that special unless they have their own moats around data and integrations. I can't imagine they're offering any particularly special functionality that you couldn't somewhat rebuild in the hyperscaler set of components that they're increasingly adding to and giving. That gives you a little bit of independence. It may not give you as good a solution on day one because you've had to assemble it yourself, but then it gives you a bit more agility. So if the niche provider doesn't go the direction you want, you've got a bit more independence to go your own way.
Brilliant, thank you very much. That was, I think we'll all agree, a masterclass from somebody who really does know the unknown. Thank you.